Come on, just say hi. We're testing a theory that if my wife is in the video, I'll get more likes and views. Yes, you gotta say hi.
I said hi. I don't know if this is gonna work because I am camera shy.
I gotta put you in the thumbnail is what I need to do. Okay, see ya. Well, hi, everybody. How's it going? Welcome to D4, D&D Deep Dive. This is the show where, most of the time, we'll take a deep dive into a specific character build and crunch numbers and try and build something fun and powerful. But today is the third week in a row now that I am doing a ranking video for my builds. But this time, it is the very first time that I am actually ranking the tanks. I gotta rank the tank. Even my tank builds have become too numerous and I've gotta split them up into a couple of tiers. So that's what we're gonna do today. We just went for a hike in the beautiful fall mountains and I could use a shower, but no, this is taking priority. I need to get this recorded and put out there or else I'm never going to do it. So once again, it's not going to be scripted at all and the editing will be very light so I can actually get it out this week. So let's just jump right in. For those who are not as familiar with the term, when we talk about tanks in role-playing games, what we're talking about is a protector character, a frontliner who wants to play defense, right? Their main goal, their main job as they see it, is to defend their allies, protect their allies, but the way they do it is by drawing enemy fire onto themselves instead of to their more vulnerable companions, right? And so a tank will always build for survivability to try and make themselves as durable as possible, but an important aspect of being a good tank is finding a way to discourage your enemies from attacking your allies and attacking you instead. It's a really fun way to play a character in-game. I've done it myself and had a blast with it. There's just something really cool about feeling like I'm here, I'm holding the line, I'm going to defend you, I'm going to protect you, and bring it on. I can take that punch. I can take that hit. So if that sounds appealing to you, I hope you will enjoy this video. You know, for new viewers that have only been watching my channel for a little bit, this might be a great introduction to you, to give you sort of a catalog of all the different tank characters, protector characters that I've done, and if one sounds interesting, I hope you'll go look it up and check it out. And for longtime viewers, this, again, like the other two ranking videos that I've done in the last couple of weeks, might just be a nice little stroll down memory lane. So thanks for joining me. The first couple of tank builds that I did not have the thing that I've come to give every tank build since, and that is some form of taunt, or soft taunt as we say, right? And again, for the uninitiated, when we say taunts or soft taunts, we're simply talking about a way that the character has to encourage the enemy to attack them, and or by discouraging the enemy from attacking their allies. Usually that's some sort of, like, if they attack anybody but you, they have disadvantage kind of mechanic, right? That the tank character, protector character is applying to the bad guy. And with the first couple of tank builds that I did not include one of those mechanics, and it became apparent to me very quickly, both as I thought about them and in reading the comments, that, you know what, there's a flaw here. And it's that we're just kind of building for survivability and not really to try to draw enemy fire, which, if you think about it, is really like the one job that the tank is supposed to have. That's the main way that they protect their allies, right? To date, on this channel, over the 2+ years that I've been doing it now, I've done 14 tank builds, and there's a 15th coming out next week. And it's hard to get 15 characters into a single graph, right? Because you just run out of colors. So I got to split them up. And similar to the damage builds, I've come up with a very simple, overly simple way to just kind of give these characters a rank or a tier score, as we'll call it. So let me explain briefly how it works for those who aren't familiar how I crunch numbers with tanks. Every time we do a damage report at levels 6, 9, 13, and 17 for a tank build, I simply pit them against 3 hypothetical combat encounters, right? There's like one that's kind of supposed to emulate a boss fight, one that's like more of a typical fight, and then just like a level appropriate fireball. And we determine if they had access to all of their resources, how much damage they would take on average in a single round of combat if all of those enemies were just attacking the tank. Something that pretty much never happens in D&D that I've seen anyway. That number ends up being our damage taken per round, DTPR as we call it, and then we just take that number and say, okay, based on how many hit points they have, including temporary hit points and or their ability to heal themselves, how long would they survive if they took that much damage every single round? It doesn't perfectly simulate what a combat encounter might be like in a game of D&D, but frankly, neither do DPR numbers or even burst damage or nova damage numbers, right? These are always done in a lab. And so the use and practical application in-game can sometimes be somewhat questionable. But at the very least, I think it gives us a decent idea of what the capabilities or potential of a character is, whether that be for sustained damage, burst damage, or today, for survivability, how good they might be at surviving. So all I've done is take their rounds to die, that RTD number, across every single encounter at every single damage report, and then just averaged it. And whatever that average ends up being, that's their tier score. Overly simple, sure. Somewhat useful, particularly if we can at least be consistent in how we're applying the model, as long as we do it the same with every single build. We have 2 tiers now. At the bottom of tier 2, bringing up the rear is, and this is going to surprise a bunch of you, the Bear Totem Barbarian. And what's surprising about that is I think that there is sort of this concept amongst the majority of the D&D community that when it comes to survivability, nobody's better than the Bear Totem Barbarian. And admittedly, that can be true. You know, when I look back at the way that I built this character, instead of giving them like a soft taunt, I tried to make them a little bit more of like a controller on the battlefield. They were using a polearm so that they had reach, so not a shield, right? They were taking the Sentinel feat, polearm master, and trying to snare and slow. And in my head, I was kind of feeling like this is a good way to exercise control on the battlefield that will then protect your more squishy back line. Not necessarily thinking, okay, I want to give them a taunt, and then I want to just make them as survivable as they possibly can be, and let's pump their armor class and all those kinds of things. I just made them a little bit more like a typical Bear Totem Barbarian that does decent damage, exercises some control, rages, has resistance to all damage types except psychic. I think that's one that I need to revisit. That's maybe on the top of the revisit list here for me, to go back and see, okay, could I find a way to give these guys a soft taunt, maybe via like a Cavalier Fighter or something, and then actually give them a shield and just make them, more durable generally. It was a fun experiment and is really the thing that kind of got me started thinking about, okay, what other character builds could I do with this in mind, where their main role is to protect and defend, and then how can I make them so that they can take as many punches as possible, right? Next up, with a tier score of 10, 9.8, we have one of the more unique tank characters that I've done to date. This was maybe the most specialized or focused or concept-driven tank that I've done, I think, and it was the Dhampir tank, the vampire. This was a challenge, and I loved it. And the idea was, because of the bite attack that they get that is based on their constitution and the fact that they can use that to regenerate hit points, we could really improve the survivability if we could find a way to make that bite attack do more damage. And so I took a lot of fighter levels and a lot of ranger levels with looking for ways to increase weapon attack damage that would thereby increase the amount of hit points we were regenerating with our bite. Yeah, it was pretty cool, I thought, and I was really happy with how it turned out. They were a battle master, so their only taunt was actually goading attack, so it was a little bit more of a limited use tank. They weren't as sustainable as most of the other tank builds that I try and do, where they can just get that soft taunt ability on a hit. But it was a good way to increase the damage that we were doing with our bite. And then Hunter, kind of the same thing. They were, Hunter Ranger, which seemed appropriate for a vampire, who was doing things like Hunter's Mark and, Colossus Slayer and things like that were just adding to weapon damage and thereby increasing the amount of hit points they could regenerate. So their survivability was largely based on their ability to heal themselves every round by sucking their enemy's blood just in time for Halloween. Coming up next at a 10 as well, a tier score of 10, 10.3, we have the very recent Moon Guardian tank, the Circle of the Moon Druid mixed with a Ancestral Guardian Barbarian. And this, again, is one of those where, most people would think the Moon Druid is just better than about anybody at survivability because they can wild shape into a big bear or something that has a lot of hit points, and then now they've got way more hit points than anybody, right? And there's some truth there, especially if you're a barbarian who rages first, and so you're taking half damage on most of the incoming damage while you're wild shaped, and then again in your humanoid form, I should say. But yeah, it ended up being powerful and potent, no question, but maybe not quite as good at survivability as you might be able to get by going other routes, particularly routes that would let you get your armor class really high. One lesson I suppose that I've learned over doing all of these tank builds is that when it comes to survivability, armor class is king. I mean, depending on what you're fighting, obviously if your DM can throw a bunch of spells at you that are just going to ignore your armor class and focus instead on your saving throws, then, that's a weakness that you have to shore up. But most damage that we take in-game, at most tables, at most combat encounters, comes in the form of bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from weapon attacks or something like them, right? And if we can crank that AC really high, we end up doing a lot better survivability-wise than even if we have resistance to damage and a ton of hit points. Not that those things aren't also valuable as well. And I guess if you can get both, then you end up being at the top of tier 1. But anyway, up next with a tier score of 13, we have the Monk tank. This was a Mercy Monk, largely. We went into Ancestral Guardian Barbarian for this as well, for that Ancestral Guardian soft taunt that's really quite effective. With a Mercy Monk, you can make your attacks and also heal yourself at the same time. And so the idea was, you're sort of taunting by hitting your enemies and then also healing yourself. Their AC, because they were a monk, couldn't ever get into those astronomical places. I mean, I guess you could put heavy armor on a monk and equip them with a shield, as some of you know, and I'll probably do a heavy armor monk build one day. But yeah, they did, because of all the self-healing they were able to do, they did get up into some nice survivability potential, and they were a monk, so that was awesome. Up next, coming in at a 13 as well, we have the Armorer. This is the first time that I ever used an Armorer in a build. It really opened my eyes to how powerful the subclass could be when you go the Guardian model, obviously, and I think it's probably my most oft-dipped subclass in my tank builds. I'll have to confirm that, but I wouldn't be surprised to find that to be true. Yeah, when you just get a taunt on every enemy that you hit with your Thunder Gauntlets, and so unlike the Ancestral Guardian Barbarian, you can hit a couple or even 3 maybe enemies in the same round and put a taunt on all of them, and unlike the Cavalier Fighter, they don't have to stay within 5 feet of you for that debuff, disadvantage on attacks against anyone but you, soft taunt to work, right? With Cavalier Fighters, they have to stay close to you in order for it to work, or it just wears off, it goes away. So they kind of have the best taunt in the game, in my opinion. I coupled them with a War Magic Wizard in order to get some spells that I wanted access to, but also some of the cool, fun defensive abilities that War Magic Wizards get. It was a pretty straightforward build, but yeah, between, the infusions that you get, heavy armor, shields, and then some of the survivability from wizards, especially the shield spell, they could be pretty dang tanky and really take a punch. Up next, with a score of 14, we have the Rogue tank. Yeah, this was my attempt at building a sort of more lithe, nimble rogue who could take a punch and also land a taunt. We went Ancestral Guardian Barbarian on that one as well. And some people, I remember, got annoyed because it took me a minute to get rogue levels. I wanted to get all the way up to Barbarian 5 so I could get extra attack. And so yeah, we were pretty delayed on the rogue levels, and people were like, bait and switch. But, rogues can actually be pretty survivable if you build them right. You don't need to have that heavy armor in order to be able to endure. They were raging in order to take advantage of the damage resistance, but we were still a dexterity-based character when it came to making our attacks. We weren't getting that rage damage bonus, or reckless attack bonus for that matter. But with evasion, they were amazing against those dex-based spells, and that's probably one thing that got their survivability higher on average, because they way outperformed just about every other tank, with one exception, when it came to surviving against fireballs and later meteor swarm. And yeah, we went arcane trickster there so that we could pick up like some defensive non-concentration based spells, things like mirror image, and of course they have uncanny dodge, which is going to come in handy for just having damage on one attack. So we made them, I think, pretty good at being able to take a hit, and because they were a rogue with a decent dex score, they were still pumping out some pretty good damage, and of course brought all of the great utility that rogues bring. So a pretty diverse and well-rounded character who could still take a punch. And finally, leading the way at tier 2, we have the Knight in Shining Armor with a tier score of 14.2. This was like my attempt to build that quintessential like mounted knight, right? That's just, they were a cavalier fighter because of course they get some nice quality of life improvements mostly for mounted combat, and it just seemed right thematically. And then paladin, again for the same reasons. When we think of like what class in D&D 5e emulates a knight, I think most of us would think paladin, right? And we went Oath of the Ancients paladin for their nice spell resistances, basically, and also the spells that they themselves get. We went Mark of Warding Human so we could get access to the shield spell, but they could only use it once a day, so that's super like big asterisk, right? Of, hey, look, you're not going to be able to cast this all that often. In hindsight, maybe could have taken a dip somewhere to try and get more regular access to the shield spell. But I was really pleased with how they turned out. I think we were able to stay well within the character concept and still build something that felt like they could taunt and have some great survivability. And of course, I didn't mention one of the other main reasons why we wanted to go Paladin was for Find Steed and later Find Greater Steed. If you're going to build a character who's designed to be a mounted combatant, it seems like it's hard to beat those spells, And so yeah, the Cavalier Pally, Knight in Shining Armor, leading the way for tier 2. All right, bringing up the rear of tier 1, with a tier score of 15, we have the Tankadon. This was my second ever tank build, and I hadn't yet quite caught on, I think, in my head to the importance of finding that taunt, that soft taunt, though I was starting to get it. Because we went Oath of the Crown Paladin for this character, and the main reason why I wanted to do that was because their Channel Divinity at least seems to indicate that they're like exercising a group taunt on the battlefield. When you actually read the ability, it makes you realize that, oh, this just keeps them from moving away from me. But because of the way that it's written, at my table, I had played an Oath of the Crown Paladin. I think I might have been playing one at the time. And that's how our DM, Corey, was kind of ruling it. I would give this big like group AoE shout, and anyone who failed their saving throw basically was kind of forced to attack me. So it worked really well. I was like, this is an amazing tank. Probably doesn't work that way at most tables. But if you can get it to, they can be super potent. Granted, Channel Divinity can only be used once per short rest, and I didn't go like Cavalier Fighter or anything like that to get a more like disadvantage when they attack anybody but you on a weapon attack, like I tend to try to do on most of my builds. But they still could be pretty survivable. They had some nice ways to buff their own hit points and their own armor class, of course, and heal themselves, no question. So I think Oath of the Crown Paladins can make a pretty decent frontline tanky-like character. The command spell, compelled duel, those are all can be taunt-like, no question. They're just a little more limited in use, and so it felt a little less sustainable looking back. Still, having played one in game, I found them to be very effective at trying to fill that role. Worth a look, no question. Up next, with a tier score of 17, we have the Battlesmith Defender. This build was an attempt to answer the question, can a pet in D&D be a tank? The Steel Defender that the Battlesmiths get have kind of a taunt-like ability, right? And so my idea was to make a character that would ride on the Battlesmith into combat and then essentially put Sanctuary on themselves and not be the one trying to take any damage here. The Steel Defender is the one that's kind of trying to be the tank and, discourage enemies or cause them to have disadvantage when they attack anybody but themselves, the Steel Defender, and then just put like Warding Bond on them so that my character could absorb a lot of the damage that was coming in to the Steel Defender and thereby improve their survivability that way, putting aid on them, just finding ways to basically buff my pet as much as I possibly could and absorb at least half of the damage that they might have been taking, putting infusions on them, all that kind of stuff. So it was really cool, and it ended up working a little better than I thought it would at first. I mean, they made it into tier 1 here for the tanks. Obviously, again, not a perfect model or system, but I do think you could make it work with limited use. I mean, the problem with the Steel Defender is they only get to have that taunt on their reaction, right? So it's not something that you can just hit multiple enemies with and constantly take advantage of. But I would love to see it in game and see how well it actually could work. It was a fun thought experiment, if nothing else. And I think it could be effective. I think it could be viable. I just haven't tried it out myself yet. So if anybody has, comment down below and let us know how it went. Up next, with a 17.3 tier score, we have the Mount and Blade. This was the only two-party team-up build that I've done where one of them was a tank, and I felt that they were so good at being a tank that I wanted to group them with the rest of the tanks. The thing that made them so good mechanically is that maybe better than any other tank character that I've built to date, they could actually force enemies to attack them instead of their friends, or at least instead of their friend, because they were actually mounted on their other character, right? This was one where there was a rogue who was a centaur, and he was the mount for the smaller tank character that was riding on top of them on their back. And because of the wording of the mounted combatant feat, where you can force an attack against your mount to attack you instead, it was like, this is actually a way that you could get at least one character in your party to kind of never take a hit and just very effectively protect them, because you're right there by them all the time, riding on their back. And the rogue was, always being able to get sneak attack off because they would always have a party member that was within range of them. They took the sentinel feat, so when attacks were made against their tank, which they inevitably were because they would force them to be, even if they were going to be made against the centaur originally, then the rogue would get a reaction attack and get more sneak attack damage. So synergistically, this might be my favorite two character build that I've done to date, and I think it just worked really well and was cool and fun and funny. There is something funny about riding your friend into combat. Keep it clean in the comments, people. Yeah, that was a good one. That took 2 videos to get through, though, because it was so long. And I have a feeling that if I do any more 2 character builds in the future, they'll probably all be broken down into 2 videos like that. And I obviously don't do a lot. I know I get a lot of requests for them. And some of you are going to write in the comments right now, hey, when are you going to do another one? It's hard. It takes a lot of time to put 2 builds together and try and get it out, in a week. And then the good news is, well, the next week I don't have to do a video, right? Because I've already got one and I can just do part 2. But then inevitably also part 2, the views for it are way, way, way less than part 1. And so I don't know if it's necessarily good for the channel, just speaking sort of monetarily and selfishly, I suppose, there. So there's a couple of reasons why I tend to not do a lot of those team up builds. Got off on a little tangent there, but anyway, the Mount and Blade, loved that one. Super fun. And if you've got a good friend that you play D&D with and you're looking for a way to like build something together where you have a lot of synergy between you, that might be the best one that I've done, I think. So check it out. Up next, with a tier score of 18, we have one of my favorite character tank builds that I've done to date, at least conceptually. They might be my favorite, just thinking about them from a pure like character mechanic, like theme, and how it would feel, the flavor of the character, because it was the Bladesinger tank. And as most of you know, I love Bladesingers. I've probably never had more fun playing a character in game than playing a Bladesinger. And monks are my favorite character class conceptually. And this character really felt, even though I've done a monk tank, this one felt like a better, more potent, more powerful, like monk-like tank, in that they were very nimble, they were very agile, and because they had 3 levels of armor artificer for that Thunder Gauntlet punch taunt, right? They were making all of their attacks with their fists. And so yeah, they were like blade singing, dancing, bobbing, weaving, making attacks with their fists, basically, Thunder Gauntlets, It was still a light armor that you're using because you had to for Bladesinger. But yeah, I loved the idea of this character maybe more than any other tank build that I've done. And obviously they were very effective. And as a wizard, they were getting shield and absorb elements and, lots of nice also potentially control options and utility options, highly mobile with, able to Misty Step around the battlefield when they needed to. I think if I ever play a tank in game again anytime soon, it's probably going to be this one. Even though I've played a Bladesinger in a longer campaign, I just would love to get back and kind of take it from this angle where you are a Bladesinger, yes, and doing some pretty decent damage and having all of the wonderful power at your fingertips that a high-level wizard gets thanks to just their spells, but then also being able to have that what's to me always a very satisfying gameplay style of highly dexterous, agile, bobbing and weaving, using your body as a weapon, but being like really, really, really hard to kill. Thanks especially to the fact that Bladesingers, of course, when they hit level 6 and they get their extra attack feature, can make an attack and cast a cantrip. And so we were doing Blade Ward cantrip, giving us resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage, right? So we could get a really high armor class. We could have resistance all of the time, very sustainably. I think it worked really well, and I really want to try it out in game. Up next, with a tier score of 23, the Abjuration Wizard. This was maybe the first tank build that I've done that kind of really opened my eyes, I think, to what survivability could potentially look like if you really, really found ways to focus on it. And even as a wizard, right, being incredibly hard to kill. So the Abjuration Wizard, of course, gets that really fantastic ward that gives them sort of a shield that absorbs damage first, right, when they get attacked, before they actually take damage to their hit points, and you can constantly replenish it when you cast abjuration spells, which you're doing all of the time, and there are some kind of cheesy ways to just cast them during a short rest and just replenish that shield all the way to full. We played a one-shot with this character once, and someone from our party, I can't remember who it was it Tori, played this character, and yeah, it was like, holy cow, they never get hit, and when they do get hit, they don't take any damage. They are amazing. They're so hard to kill. And that was a lot of fun because, yeah, it was kind of the first time I think that I ever was like, can a wizard be a tank? Can a character that we don't typically think of as being really durable, hard to kill, tanky, can they fill that role? And I kind of found, yeah, they can, and better than any other tank character that I've built to date also. So that was just cool and fun, just kind of a fun discovery. And I think to date it's still one of my most popular videos, most viewed. So anyway, That's a good one. Up next with a tier score of 31, we're making some big leaps here. The Swords Bard tank, the Bard tank. Again, in that theme of could a Bard be a tank? And turns out, yeah, they can. Swords Bards are really powerful in that, they get those flourishes. And Defensive Flourish is like shield on steroids. And so between Defensive Flourish and the shield spell, which they picked up by being a Hexblade Warlock, and that was nice because then they got to use their charisma for attacks, right? Not to mention Armor of Agathys. They were just really hard to kill. We went Fighter there for Cavalier for the taunt, and then just Bard the rest of the way. And yeah, they ended up being, I think, a really potent character because they're Bard, so they've got some really great support, control, utility options with their spells, right? And even healing. Well, I already said support, so don't say that. And I'm probably not going to remember to cut that, so you can all just have a laugh at my expense. But yeah, they can inspire, they can buff, they can debuff, and be really, really hard to kill at the same time while, putting that Cavalier taunt on their enemies to try and encourage the enemies to attack them instead of their friends. It was a cool concept, and one that you probably wouldn't typically think of when you think of, I want to play a Bard character, right? This is a Protector Bard. And fun and potent. And finally, at the very top of tier 1, we have, and this really surprised me, you guys, I'm not gonna lie, the Sorcerer tank, the Clockwork Soul tank. The levels to which this character could achieve like survivability blew me away when I built it. I did not expect them to be as hard to kill as they ended up being capable of being. We went Earth Genasi so that we could cast Blade Ward as a cantrip and get damage absorption. The nice thing about sorcerers is they can also quicken spell, so they could also quicken Blade Ward if they had the sorcery points for it. But not only that, because of the ward that they end up getting that can also, absorb some damage at the expense of their sorcery points, admittedly, access to really potent spells, shield spell, Armor of Agathys. They were just able to really kind of buff their own hit points, buff their own armor class. Of course, we went Armorer there, Guardian Armorer, because Clockwork Soul, Artificer, come on, match made in heaven. And it gave them that awesome taunt, plus the infusions to bump their AC even more. They were just, they were really poderoso and fun, and also a sorcerer. So like with the Abjuration Wizard tank, right, you just have this slew of fantastic spells that you can use for control or burst, utility, all kinds of great, fun, powerful, potent options. So that was definitely the automaton-focused tank caster that ended up being a lot harder to kill than I thought they were going to be. But I'm going to give you another little spoiler for next week, so stop watching now if you don't want spoilers. We've got a tank build coming up next week, and how much do I want to divulge here? Let me just put it this way. They're in tier 1, and it also surprised me. And I was very shocked at the level of survivability that we could get up to with that character. So stay tuned for that character build next week, coming to you on Tuesday. And that's the end of my Rank the Tanks. And it feels nice that it didn't take as long as the other ones. I love you guys. Thank you so much for all that you do to support this channel. Thank you so much for making it possible for me to have spent the last 2 years of my life and more creating these fun and sometimes funny and powerful and entertaining character builds for Dungeons & Dragons, this game that we all love so very much. I'm glad to have made it through this third and final, ranking video. Hopefully I won't have to do it again for another year because I don't have the time. So now I'm going to go take a nap. I hope that you have a fantastic day and that I see you again very soon. Take care.